Welcome back to What Problem Are You Solving, where we turn metrics into momentum. That's the theme of this week's episode. So, as usual, let's jump right into it. Adam, great seeing you. What problem are you solving this week?
All right, I know you only like one, but the first one is first one's trivial. I had to find a t-shirt. I'm usually on the data corn. I had to find a shirt with a metric on it. So I
40.
went back to one of my birthday t-shirts. So that's the short one. So now have I earned a bonus?
Carry on.
Reluctantly. All right. So the problem I'm solving, I'm grateful for the workshop, the talk we're going to give later in the week. So in addition to making Ty proud, I want to find that balance between, vanity metric, momentum and inspiration, and numbers that don't lie and tell a story, but also numbers that do lie and vanity metrics and not deflating people. So I want to try to find that balance. And what's good about doing a podcast every Monday next week, I'll have to face y'all and see if we did a good job. I can't hide. So yeah, I want to thread that needle: momentum, inspiration, support on numbers that don't lie, storytelling, but then also not vanity metrics, kind of fishing storytelling kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
this big.
All right. But I'm glad we're doing this first. This is going to get me more to kind of find that balance. So, all right,
Awesome.
I'm out.
Hopefully it inspires you. Ty, how you feeling? And what problem are you solving this week?
Oh my God. Told you guys in the green room that my eyeballs would just feel like two kickballs and they had sand in them and my allergies. And I spent the weekend in Chicago. I was there for 4 days. I worked basically from 8 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night for 4 straight days doing super intense people work, consulting and trying to mess with the allergies and the smoke and blah blah blah. So I get to the airport. I'm like, I gotta go, guys. I gotta go. Delayed, 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 delayed. Cancel. I'm, I had to get up. I'm flying back in today. I had to get up for a 5:05 flight out of Midway to get here. I have whooped. So part of the problem solving is allergies and fatigue. The so I get past it. I'm going to go to sleep. Benadryl helps everything, right? The other thing that I'm trying to solve is how do we create an experience for the people at the Good Soil Conference that we're going to be talking about that supports them in a way so they understand the power of solving the right problem and measuring whether or not they're going in the right direction. Um, you know, uh, uh, our our guest, John, Adam, and I met doing work uh, in the government, and one of the things that I came out of that experience was what, so what, now what, right? And how do you know, right? So who are you solving for? How do you know? I have this whole kind of thing that we created, but really trying to figure out solving the right problem kind of drives whether or not you know what to look for. So that's the problem I'm trying to solve, and I'm glad to be here with our guest.
I, too, am glad to be here with our guest. So, Jamar Reed, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And what problem are you solving this week?
Yeah, so John, Adam, Ty, first of all, super excited to be here with you guys. I mean, looking forward to this conversation. I've been stoked about this conversation since we found out we were going to be chatting together. And I've been texting Ty and Adam, nonstop. My apologies. I text early in the morning. I noticed some of you guys are late night texters. So, but yeah, so problem that I've been tackling on the personal front this week. Wife's been traveling, Angie. My wife's been traveling, so I have two little ones. So I've been and two girls. So tackling, trying to keep hair together, outfits together, get them out to school. Usually we run man to man. So I've had to run 1-on-2 this week. And then the other thing is, trying to keep up with the weeds growing in the yard. So try to do that this week. But as far as getting ready for this conference, I've been thinking deeply about, not only looking at how to measure the business and how to talk about measuring the business with regard to those that are those startup founders, those entrepreneurs, but also thinking deeply about how do we have the conversation around how to use these metrics to have conversations with investors. How do we zero in on what's important? What are we trying to do? Because often, I'll cut this short, but often we think about most folks go into business to turn a profit. But I was thinking about a buddy of mine that started a business a while back, and he said, "Hey, my goal is to build something that so that others might eat." And I think there's an organization here in DC by the same name. So if that's your goal is going to be different. Your KPIs and your OKRs are going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
From someone that may be starting a business where it's for profit, it's to turn a profit and make money. So I'm looking forward to having those conversations when we get into Dallas, and then leading up. I know there's, like I said, there's going to be a lot of texting, a lot of conversations that happen leading up. So looking forward to that. So.
It's fascinating that you talk about that, because the work, John and I were introduced first, and Adam came along, and we became the Three Musketeers around us, that we worked in an environment where it was all about mission. That there was money, but how do you equate people or help people who think about not dollars and cents and what's my ROI and the multiples of that, but did I accomplish something, and helping them think about their expenditures. We talked about cost per unit value. Right. And that's and people have to define what value is. And so how do you determine the amount of cost? What's your business model to make sure that you're balancing it out, that you're actually creating more value than overhead? So that's the way we think. John, your turn. How about you, buddy?
Value. Just as you guys were chatting, I really got wrapped around this whole weed metaphor, because yes, weeds are taking over my backyard right now. I got a plan. So that is a problem I am actively trying to solve. And so we got some sunny days coming up this week. So I'm going to go out there and pull and kill some weeds. But it's a good metaphor for, don't let it, you gotta let it grow, right? Is that it? You got to prune, man. It's all about the startups, right? You got to prune away the bad data so that you can expose and flourish the good data.
You gotta have good soil. You gotta have things growing there. Right. You gotta stop fighting it. Don't fight the momentum. Pull in everything. Let things grow. Fill in. Stay
that
where
one's
they
a
want.
Freebie. You can take that. Take that to the bank. All right, you guys got that one. Oh man. So
you ever seen the movie Tap? It's an old school movie. Challenge. We got a challenge going on. John says one thing, Adam says no.
So let's roll with it, because I hope you guys are productive and everyone has a good experience and learns a lot and becomes highly inspired to go off and do the right thing. I am going to have fear of missing out, FOMO, and I'm going to help you guys kind of think through what this is going to look like, because the theme of this week's topic is, turning metrics into momentum, looking at what are those things, are the data that early entrepreneurs need to know to just make sure they're on the right track, right? When you're starting from zero, like if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. But how do you measure those waypoints along the way? So that way you can tell, are you growing a weed or are you growing a flower? So let's dive in.
You out with the metaphor, Mr. John. Oh, by the way, Jamar, John is a recovering engineer. He'll say so. He's also an amateur philosopher, so he has this philosopher engineer part of it. I appreciate it. That's why I like the guy.
No, I love it. Yeah, I'm looking. Yeah.
So I have one for you, and this is one of the things that John and Adam and I have been playing with, is innovation accounting. One of our previous episodes was about innovation accounting. How do you account for things from the very beginning and we all, I think we can agree that one of the least you know about your success or the opportunity of your business is at the very beginning. But yet we have this fantasy that I know exactly what to measure. As a data guy who's working in business, how do you see that, Jamar? In innovation accounting, when you have almost no idea about what success looks like at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I mean, that's an interesting question because it's often, especially on, and I'll say, you know, some folks won't expect this in the corporate space. Like you go into a place like General Motors where I'm at, and you expect things to already be in place, but you find that
You're
you're
like, surely
solving
they must have something in place, right?
there it is. Yeah. But you find that you're solving the same, you find that you're solving the same problems or answering the same type of questions that you would with, someone that's running their own shop, So one of the things that I like to start with, going back to what I was talking about before, understanding what are your main goals, because I might go in and say, hey, your goal is to bring in as much revenue as possible, but that might not be the goal of this product or this service that you're looking to offer. The goal of this service or product might be to drive folks into the top of the funnel so that they take a look at other things that may be available. So I guess that's the starting point for me. What are we looking to do with this, either this business or this new product, this new service? What's the main goal? That's my starting point. Any kickoff discussion, we're probably going to spend the first 20 minutes talking about that, if not more.
I think you're in good company for sure.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would agree that for us, I mean, even look at the title of the podcast is "What Problem You're Solving." It's tongue in cheek. It is what problem you're solving. The acronym is also, in some ways, what pays. Mm-hmm. And so it's our belief that if you can figure out the problem that you're solving, you can figure out how you make money off of it, right? But most of the time, at least in the engineering spaces that John and I grew up in, it's, we know what the problem is, and we'll just go and build it, and then they look for market, right? They get some requirements that somebody says, well, I need this, and never go and validate the requirements and just fire, to use the military term, not maybe a little too early, hopefully, to use that, but figuring out now that the customer, the market has given us indication that what we're building is not right, and we have data. John had this thing where he says, what is it? Turn I thinks to I knows with data, right? How do we do that? And I'm wondering.
I think one data point into we know with data.
I love it. And John and Adam, we're going to have to make sure that we get it right. I think to we know. Yeah. You're typing. Okay. So what do you think about that statement, Jamar?
No, I love that. I mean, I thank you for putting it back up. I think into we know with data. I think I love the idea of it's basic. It's science pretty much, right? It's the data science piece of it. It is the, I have a hypothesis that, if I add this new product, I expect, X% in lift, that this is going to drive folks, into the top of my top of my funnel. Now it's my job to go and prove it. Even as someone that's I'm someone that's starting up a new company. I think it's an important product. I think that it's an important problem that we're looking to solve. But like you said, it's one person that's coming in and saying, I think that this problem needs solving. And I also think that folks are going to be willing to pay a premium or pay a fair market price to purchase this, this solution. But then you have to go out and you have to prove it. And especially, and not only prove it to your customers, eventually you're going to have to prove it to investors and say, hey, not only can I sell, the first, 10,000 widgets, but with your investment, I can scale this and we can take it from here to there. So I love that. I love that statement. I'm gonna jot that. I'm gonna steal that one. That one's coming with me.
2 freebies in one night, man. I'm almost out of good ideas. So.
All right. So I like it. Challenge. Did I do it right?
Challenge.
Did I do it? All right. So I agree with that. I even supplied the meme. I think therefore I am testing my assumptions. I do think since we're in private here in the green room and we're just prepping for Thursday, in a vacuum, turning an individual assumption into a piece of data with an experiment is great. And I think that that's half of the battle. But because we've talked about the goal right? Like it's still missing direction. Like you can then know, right? I know that people sit in traffic, right? I think people are upset that they're sitting in traffic. I think that people will buy my product because they're sitting in traffic. And then because they bought and even there, you're still not done because you're still not achieving your goal. So it seems simple. And this is kind of why I want to really over prepare for Thursday and then beyond, because this conversation comes up constantly, even in the biggest, corporations in the world. It's like, yes, break things down into their atomic pieces, and this is why I like the business model canvas. I love it. Break them down into the elements, but you still got to build it back up together. And I still want to make sure, OKRs, as flawed as parts of that system, it's still, what I like about it is we've talked on it. People just
challenge.
People don't do it. The system is great. People don't use it right.
I'll give you that.
You at least have the key results that feed into the objective. And then theoretically, if you're doing it right, you have some of those KPI. And so I also want to make sure we don't get at it tonight without defining the difference between a KPI, a metric, an OKR, a data point, a fact, an opinion, all that stuff. All right. So yes, I want to connect that through line, because you can know something and not necessarily be headed in the right direction, or not have that be trending in the right direction or telling the right story. So yeah, that's my mini challenge.
So I'm interested in, so if we kick it back up, you said a couple of things. I think the KPIs, OKRs are going to be, for our workshop, going to be important. And I'm going to leave it up to two of you, because even Jamar, on this show, I think we've done 4 or 5 episodes on KPIs and OKRs. We keep going back and forth and trying to find it and what's important and what's the path. But I want to kick it up kind of more globally. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about, because you said science. And whenever we teach we teach startups with this, and I literally say, everything you need to know about running, at least the beginning parts of examining a startup, you learn in 4th grade science. I had an idea, I made an observation, I had a couple of guesses, I ran an experiment. I got the experiment that says, yes, I'm going in the right direction. Maybe I need a little bit more. Maybe it's just complete failure. You make a decision and you move on.
Yeah.
What's the power? And I think that our guests, that the people are going to be in the workshop, will come from everywhere. They'll come from people who are complete startups all the way through sophisticated organizations like GM. At the GM, I think the 3 of us understand what it looks like at the startup level, right? How to run an experiment. How do they run experiments at a GM? To even start to think about the power of automatizing, love the word, Adam, thank you, the elemental atomic pieces to say, am I doing this right? How do they run these experiments? How do they even think about them where you're at?
Yeah, one thing, and I'm sure we're hearing this. I'm sure this is something that is talked about at many organizations, and you guys probably know what I'm going to say before I say it. But fail fast is something that we talk a lot about, and I want to hear what you're thinking, Ty, on that. But that's fail fast, because honestly, in my space, in the business that I'm supporting, you don't have a whole lot of time to go down the wrong road, because the team that I support. So one of the teams I support is the B2B piece, but then I also support an innovation group. Their job is to come up with it's basically to solve new problems, to find ways to put out a new idea. And then my job is the job of my team is to put the data in place so that we can test it, that we can track it, and then we can quickly advise, hey, this is your stated goal, to grow revenue or to grow volume or to decrease churn. This is your stated volume, and quickly determine that solution is either it's working or it will work, but it needs to go back and we need to tweak it, or we need to just go ahead and just move on. We need to cancel that, move on. What's the next idea in the hopper that we need to be working on? So I mean, so fail fast. So and be fine with failing fast and moving on, saying, hey, this didn't work. There are other ideas that we need to look at. So that's how we handle it internally. I want to hear what Adam. I think you have a thought, and Ty, I think you had a thought as well. Love to hear. Yeah.
So this is one of the easy ones, I think. Like when you mentioned decreased churn, right? So like you talk about experimentation, you talk about metrics, you talk about goals. I think you could fit all these in, not just with OKRs, but with smart goals or smart hypothesis, right? So specific, and let's first agree on, was specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely, or
time bound. Sure. Yeah.
What's the R? Sometimes it's not relevant. Sometimes people use repeatable, not repeatable,
or realistic. Yeah, I've heard different versions.
Achievable is the A, so not real. All right. So if you starting with fail fast, right? So your metric is specific and time bound, right? So to me, a metric has to have a number and a date. So sort of agree on that. Then if you put in fail fast, it's like these experiments, maybe not in corporate, but maybe in corporate, you should be learning something on we talk a lot about Agile on the show. John's a resident expert about Agile, but like 2 or 3 week sprints, for the most part, you should be able to know, like you said, it's either working or it's not working or it's directional. You have some data in 2 or 3 weeks, a quarter, OKRs are a quarter at the most. We've talked about breaking this all the way down into design sprints and a day. So you know what the time bound piece is. It's either try to put this into a day, if we were doing design sprints, 2 weeks if you're doing 2 or 3 weeks if you're doing agile sprints. Is that what we're calling them now? Agile
sprints, I think we're still calling them sprints,
and then quarterly. So I feel like that's easy when you have something like, I want to reduce churn by X% is also your SMART goal, and then you're just coming up within a quarter, say, right? And then each experiment should be reducing churn, should be directionally reducing churn, within a week or 2 weeks. And if it's not, you're failing fast. If it is, you're measuring stuff, you're learning, you have both sides of the equation there. So that to me is the cleanest example of using, and then you can use your metrics to tell a story to, whether it's investors or stakeholders or people in finance at a corporate or traditional investors at a startup, where it's like, hey, we learned all this stuff, which is qualified, which I was nervous about bringing in on Thursday, where it's like, well, that's not a number, it's qualified data, but still we're learning this stuff, and we have data, we have numbers that are proving that churn is at least, being reduced in these pockets over here. Is that the cleanest example that we have on the show? I still think with startups, coming up with that reduced churn by, X% is much harder than people give it credit for. But when you do have that top level goal, the experimental goals become pretty straightforward. The cadence at which you're failing fast or learning fast becomes pretty straightforward. Then it's just a question of running good experiments to get that data and holding yourself accountable.
Well, here's what's interesting to me, and Jamar, I think that you as the person who lives in the corporate environment. I mean, this is where, and I love the fact, and I didn't realize this, that you belong to an innovation group. So we have to make sure that when we part of this workshopping of this episode tonight is to think about what we need to be saying on Thursday, but that you live inside of an innovation group. Powerful, which is different than a production group, right? Because the production group says we need to do churn, or no, not churn. ISO, John. ISO is reduction in what is it, John?
Like defects,
Defects. Reduction in defects. You can run an experiment in reduction in defects, which is different than running the experiments in an innovation group, right?
Yes.
Because it's not about learning in the defect side; it's about reducing error. On the innovation side, it's about learning as much as possible to get to the right thing. How does that work in the corporate world? Because I think that there's something different in learning, right? In your shop, an innovation shop in learning, and the corporate or the parts shop, which
Yeah.
is in reduction in defects. How does that work?
Yeah.
What's
So
your experience with that?
let me just correct one thing. So I support innovation, but I'm also on the production side, not like
Snap.
producing. We're a small team, relatively small team. But we support with regard to B2B, we're supporting innovation and we're going into production. But I'll say with the with when supporting the innovation groups, one of the things is I think we talked about it. You're figuring out, hey, am I churning? Am I reducing churn? Am I not doing what I intended to do, which is reduce churn, or am I doing it directionally, but I need to make some tweaks? The other thing that I'd like to add to that, which we do a lot of with regard to supporting the innovation group, we're also learning things around like there may be a data science team that's working on LTV and I'm going to try not to use acronyms. You all know what I'm saying. Lifetime value, customer lifetime value.
Well, I think those are important, by the way. I think that in the moment, it's going to be important to do like LTV and CAC, right?
Yeah.
What's your customer acquisition? Those things that people in this room, they need
Yep.
to be hearing that.
Yes. So LTV or lifetime value, and this is real. This is a real example. We did, in one experiment, we did find out, hey, we are not reducing. Let me think about it. We weren't reducing churn. We were actually increasing churn. But then when we added the additional data element, other group was working on lifetime value, we started to realize that, hey, we are increasing churn, but we're increasing churn on customers that have low lifetime value. And we're expending a lot of and now I know this is live, but we're having a conversation. We're spending a lot of time supporting these fleet customers, and it was expensive. So we did find out, hey, this might be something that we incorporate. So we went back to the beginning and added a new problem that we were looking to solve, but added that additional data element. So there are times that, in the innovation group, it loops back. And I think that's one of the doc that you sent over, talking about the loop and looping back and bringing those learnings back up. So
I think guys, I don't know about you, but that feels really important because what he just described is taking the data and incorporating it into the next evolution of your business model. And so what you said, oh, we have to figure that out. But I heard a couple of key words: churn, because we're trying to bring them back in. We have a lifetime value. Oh, and the other thing you said, we know the market. The market is fleet customers. They aren't churning on individual cars. These are fleet customers that we need to be thinking about. How do we keep them in our loop? So I think it's important that our people are going to be in the room, hear those kinds of things, that they incorporate them, and like, your business model is not a static
Yes,
idea.
your business model and your experiments, they're not a single card, it's a flip book.
Yeah.
So John will be happy. I'll give OKRs credit in this case, explicitly calling out, like, you're increasing this metric, but you're not decreasing something. So, like when we go through that, I think we don't have to redo it now. John's fancy editing team is going to put in where we talked about OKRs, and you have 3 of them. You should be 50% sure you're going to make it. And, the sort of rules of OKRs. I'm wondering if you can ever get that second piece of, do you need a definitive answer? Like, are we increasing or decreasing churn before you can figure out the secondary effects, or can you ever kind of learn that other thing without passing go and without collecting $200? I don't know if it even matters, and I'm not trying to just, we can move on, but I was curious because I was wondering, still then it's clean. Like okay, do you need that first answer, and then do you need to like secondarily examine what else it's affecting? Because then you still need your goal, right? As long as your goal is clear, that it's not really reducing churn, but increasing profitability or something like that, or increasing, like, you need both. I don't know. How do you solve for that instead of me kind of?
I think you're walking us through it, Adam. I mean, I'm enjoying following it, because I think you answer that first when you say, hey, you know what, we're actually increasing churn. So not what we set out to do. And so you check that, you say, yep, we ran this experiment, it increased churn, check. But then we look at it and we say, okay, let's take a look at who's churning out. So you're taking a step further and saying, hey, let's segment these groups. I'm saying, or in this case, let's look at lifetime value. Are we losing the customers that we want to retain, or are we losing customers that we're fine with, moving on because the product may not make sense in the way that we can support them. So that's just my thought, just thinking it through real time.
You're pruning the garden, right?
Right. There we go. Yeah. So
Challenge.
You have different, fauna that you're trying to accommodate, right? And so some things are not compatible. So you need to, and I'm really glad you highlighted the point that there may be times where you need to do things that don't scale to get data. You might need to do things that are incompatible with maybe your product vision, knowing that I need to test this just so I can get some data to prove to myself, prove to my stakeholders that this is not a viable idea or so.
So where I complimented OKRs, this is where I think people, because then it's like, yes, when it's that clean in the first place, but it's not that clean because then it's like, well, maybe we shouldn't have been testing churn. Maybe churn shouldn't have been our objective, and long-term and lifetime value or just revenue should be, because then if every single time you get an answer to churn, but then it's like, well, this is irrelevant. We don't know if it's really helping us or hurting us, and you have to run a secondary experiment anyway, then it's not helpful. Not to mention the fact that I like that we're practicing with GM, but a lot of startups are not going to know the long term, so they're not going to know really if they're firing their bad customers yet. And they're going to be incredibly reluctant, to fire customers, and we talk about it and we have confidence in doing that. But a startup is just going to be happy that they have 100 customers. And I guess maybe you could just argue that churn is not the right thing. Well, but retention is one of those pirate metrics that we talked about with Ty. So it is kind of the right. So I don't know. I'm stuck.
It's interesting as you're talking about the last thing you said is, I don't know, I'm stuck. That's what Adam's last. The part that it was interesting to me, I think that happens literally all the time, not literally, all the time for startups. And what I hear you saying, Jamar, is that it's a realization for established organization is the paradox of data. The data can become paradoxical as we read it. We thought we were getting one thing, but it's telling us another thing. But what you have to be able to do is expect the unexpected, follow the data, and tell the story. Right? Expect the unexpected, follow the data, and tell the story. Because
even if it's wrong, or even if it's against what we thought.
Yeah.
But the other part is, and I'd love to hear this, want to have a little bit about this, and I think we can do this on Thursday, is that your stories have structure. Every story ever told has a structure. Once upon a time, and then there was a problem, and then they had a fight, and they almost died, but then they solved the problem, they lived happy ever after. Whatever the arc of the story. In business, that arc of the story is your strategy. That's the guiding principle around what you're also testing. It helps to guide how you think about this. And so I guess I'm asking a question to both Adam, I'm practicing now, Adam and Jamar. What are your thoughts about the paradox of data? In other words, expect the unexpected, follow the data, tell the story, and then how strategy helps you put the lens on what you're looking at. Now, that you have to maybe agree that strategy is not a 25, unless I think there's a lot to be said about strategy. Chinese have a 500-year strategy, but that means that they have their extension is really long. Most of us would say if your strategy is any more than 3 years, you're in a fantasy because now you're guessing you've already determined what the market's going to do. A 500-year strategy allows you to guide the market in some way, right? You shape the market in the long term. Understanding that, what is your thought about this paradox of data? It says I'm looking for one thing, but I have to trust the data of what the market is telling me. This is for both Jamar and Adam. And I think, John, what I'd like you is to kind of help me balance this and test this idea out for the story Thursday. Does that make sense, guys?
It does, and I'm gonna say that. So one thing I think, and I noticed Adam is definitely asking the right question. I'm gonna come back to your question, Ty. I promise. I'm
No,
noticing. I'm hearing what he's saying.
Why we're doing it? This is why we're doing it.
He's bringing up OKRs, and it took me a second. I was processing it, and you're right, Adam. You set out with an objective, and you get down to the end of the experiment. That's not the time to change the OKR. The OKR is the OKR. It's in a smaller sense, it's not long-term strategy, but it's the strategy. It's the strategic vision for what you're trying to do right now. Right. And I like that you kept bringing this here, and I'm processing it. And I agree with you. You don't change the study at the end because you've already set your OKRs. You'd have and you help me out with this piece here. Are we going back and we are creating a new OKR based on what we found at the end? Or are we tied it up, we know it dry, we know that or what are we doing there? And I'm gonna come back to your question, Ty. I apologize.
No, run it. This is why we're doing this.
Yeah.
It's important. Sounds like you're asking Adam a very important question that actually might help to answer this paradox of data and the stories that get out of it.
Coming back to that. Yep. Yeah.
Adam?
I'm not a strategy. I do think, so these two guys and three guys are strategy experts. I do think there's a time where you have to commit to the objective when the board or the market or the stock market, even the analysts, like people are expecting a specific number. I do think then it comes down to the experiments and it's right or wrong. But I do think with startups, when you're still learning and you're still in search mode and not execute mode, I do think that's probably the cleanest answer. I saw John's, I figured it out like mid-sentence. So I do think, yes, when you're in search mode, Eric Ries sometimes talks, it doesn't matter what gas mileage you're getting and we have a car quote, if you're driving off a cliff. I do think you don't want to be overly chaotic when you're changing something mid experiment.
Yep.
But I do think there are times when you're like, yeah, this is the wrong objective. It's not the wrong objective, but it is the wrong, it's hard to start untangling objective with vision and mission, but it is
objectives can be wrong. Strategies can be wrong.
I
can
do
flat
think,
out be the wrong thing. And as long as you're being informed by data along the way, it's okay to be informed and create better OKRs the next time, better strategies the next time.
I mean, to take this back, Ty liked my word, at the atomic level. I remember Mr. Jonathan Burtfield and I used to run these risky assumptions matrix 2x2s. Shout out to our friend David Bland. He'll be on next week. And it was like, it's not really until we would spend all this time, Matt, what are your assumptions, mapping them on a 2x2, designing the experiment, running. But the truth is, nobody had any clue what the actual real assumptions were until after they ran that first experiment, ever. The smartest people you've ever met in government, nonprofits and startups and corporates. So, and it was fascinating to watch it every time. It was like this whole entire, plans are useless, planning is essential. That exercise is valuable, but it was never ever once the real assumptions, because it was always when you start designing the experiment and you realize I even need I have an internal assumption that I can get resources. That's an assumption. I have to, you're going to build a landing page. You have to do you have anyone can you even get 100 people to view? Well, that's an assumption. So that's the first. Yes, I think there are times when we teach people to fail fast, to acknowledge that they're wrong.
Yeah.
And so when you're seeing that maybe you do have the wrong, but I won't give you as clean of an answer on the rest of it. And I also have an answer to Ty's question at some point.
Yeah. Same thing for Ty. And I'm on Ty's question, just taking it back. It actually ties into what Adam just said. I mean, how often do you have a plan? And it's a great strategy. Then you start to open up the data and you have a plan for how you're going to deliver the solution. You start to open up the data. You start to dig through what you have and where your gaps are, and what you need to fill in. But you have a strategy. So I mean, and it goes back to kind of what I think Adam was saying. You get to a place where you open up the data, you're looking at what you have. You have to, in my opinion, sometimes you have to go back and adjust your strategy and adjust in the similar case, adjust your objective, because the data that we have access to, maybe it's richer than what we thought we had at the beginning, or maybe it lacks the information we need to actually answer the question we're trying to answer. So I do think that you have to be flexible there. So I'm gonna turn it over to
So I could help. I could use your help. So we know that strategy, and I believe this. There's a woman by the name of Amy Edmondson. Amy is usually associated with psychological safety. But prior to that, Amy is a trained engineer. In fact, she worked for Bucky Fullmeister, the Buckyball, right? So that's who she worked for. Amy wrote a paper, probably early 2000s, that talked about strategy as a set of experiments, right? It's a hypothesis. Strategy is a hypothesis, I think is the title of the article. And so having that tells me that strategy is not your strategy is the thing that helps to give you the left and rights. And John and Adam, I may talk about good strategy, bad strategy, and like the hallmarks. It gives you understand the problem to be solved, the kernel of the truth, left and rights, and what is and what out, right? That sometimes we see strategies as a certainty, not as a guide. And what I heard you say, Jamar, is that when you have the data in the notion of the paradox, either LKRs, PKIs, that when you have data that says you're not going in the right direction, it's okay. Then you can go back, adjust your strategy because it is a guide to go and say what we thought was right, assumption, was just that, an assumption. Bad news bears, right?
Yeah.
You break it down. But we don't want to have that happen to us. So we have the institutional maturity, right? You have the institutional maturity to go, you know what? We're okay. Because then you go to the boss and say, hey, I'm telling you, the data says this. But we know what happens to Kodak, right? We know what happens to some of these other bigs that like, no, we are going to do this because that's what we committed to.
Yeah.
Okay. At your own peril, right? At your own peril. Just a thought, and I appreciate that. What else do you think we should talk about that we should offer up on Thursday?
Is that question for me, or is that?
It's it's absolutely for Adam and I, the three of us. But we have John here to consult to our workshop.
Yeah,
to start workshopping this, and that's why I think it's so. We're doing this live, right? We're workshopping this idea live, which I think is important.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot. We talked about assumptions. We talked about the power of experiments. We talked about it's the simplicity of science, having data helping to drive your decision. Actually, John, we used to call it data-driven decisions.
Yes, and do you remember what we also used to call it?
Go ahead.
Data beats
Data
disagreements.
Beats disagreements. Yes.
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 I just remembered that. Yeah, which was a good catchphrase, right? As a bumper sticker, just to say, hey, we can argue whether or not to go left or right, but data is going to beat that disagreement. You can choose to ignore it at your own peril, like we just talked about.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you're collecting good enough data and you're documenting what your assumptions are going in, the outcome should be that data will beat that disagreement.
So here I have one for Adam and Jamar. If we go back earlier in our conversation, we talked about learning, right? And Jamar talked about your innovation group as speed, right? Speed is an important part of that. I think that's going to be important for us to help them think through. So what does speed look like? Move fast, break stuff. Cool. You also can break a lot of things that don't need to be broken. Is it the speed of just change? Is it the speed of learning? Is it the speed of innovation? We have one philosophy that we work out of. Shout out to Steve Blank about what that looks like, and speed and urgency, particularly in the mission space. Because Jamar, if you ever look up Steve Blank, he built the godfather framework of what lean startup looks like, particularly in the mission space. He knows more about national security than and what national security looks like as a framework, not like the part of national security, but the entire framework. He talks about the speed of learning with urgency. How do you, Adam? I'd love to hear from you as a person who speaks to startups, and then Jamar, who lives in a corporate environment where innovation and product you're kind of managing. What does speed look like? And I think it's going to be important for our people to hear that on Thursday.
I'm gonna make space for Adam. I'm gonna process that. Yeah, I think Adam. Yeah.
Even after 20 years, I have an unsatisfying answer, but I think it's the right one without data. It's so ironic. I do think it comes down to what problem are you solving. I think we talked to Mike and other people in the pure customer discovery phase. I don't think it's not about doing 100 interviews, and that's the wrong metric. I think it was funny because I had this ready. It's like doing 100 interviews. It depends what that metric means. So that it's good for something. It doesn't mean that you solve the problem. It does show that a founder is motivated. It shows that there's 100 people that, if you agree that they talk to the right people. So there are things that even 100 bad technique interviews that, don't show a problem that do prove it. Proves that they're hustling. It proves that, they know how to find customers. Proves that that those people exist. I do think that there's some velocity of just insights that you need, some raw, like you need to be, whether it's sending out a company update, once a week or running it one experiment per week around the problem and customer fit. It's a tricky one because nobody wants to do there and you just want to go straight to solutions and metrics and funding. But I do think that I used to run Trello cards that admittedly nobody wanted to use, but I would literally have assumption, this is why I still love the turning data, I think into, I know with data, I would have assumptions on the left and I would have experiments in the middle. I would literally watch those assumptions get turned into learnings on the right in a Trello board or whatever tool anyone wants to use. And then what was beautiful, not only would you have the learnings piling up on the right, but then you'd have their assumptions kind of organized and reprioritized week over week. So I do think, as much as we all talk about like the one metric that matters and running these smart hypotheses, I do think life happens, and I think you also need a holistic system where you're just looking at like, what are all the things that we think? What are a couple of the experiments in flight? How are these learnings piling up week over week? And then attaching those somehow to like a unifying North Star. We haven't talked about North Star metrics on this call, which is surprising. But I guess, we'll get there. That's what this dry run was for. So yes, I think there's some, and then I'll go on. I'm just giving you time until you just take the mic away from me.
No, you're good.
Do this on Thursday. Do this on Thursday too. That's why I like to go. Just grab the mic out of my hand. I'll sit next to you instead of.
Actually, you hit on one thing that I love. I North Star. I've been talking a lot about North Star, and not really even in my day-to-day job. Just talking with friends about as they're looking at their mission statements within the organizations. But going back to speed, tied to your question, one thing I wrote down was, I think getting to the right question early or questions. And then prioritizing those business questions. So what do we need to know? If I'm in I wanted, and that's one thing I wanted to do is take it back to startups. I mean, I'd imagine if you're, I don't have to imagine. I started a company, but hey, I didn't have endless amounts of funds, so I had to quickly get to, what questions do I need to answer quickly about the top of my funnel? How am I going to get folks to come in the door? And then, get them interested, and then get them to a place where we're having that initial conversation, and then that turns into business. So I need to get so first thing was asking the right questions early, and prioritizing those. And then the other thing is quickly learning to recognize patterns. I mean, as you start to look at the data, am I able to start to recognize those patterns, to start to create those buckets, segments, who's interested in my product, and and who may be very interested and who may be passively interested, and how do I speak to them differently? But I think that's something that I guess speed, when we're talking about quickly getting to that comes to mind.
So this is great. So I love the addition of the pattern recognition, because that is a superpower that entrepreneurs that do well can spot patterns, even if they're kind of fragmented, right? The words people use in interviews and discovery as you go, the ability to pull threads and pull themes really helps you pivot quickly. I'm going to play devil's advocate too, because some words you used were interesting, because again, words mean things, and I'm always get curious about context, right? We've talked about churn early on, and we also talked a little bit about top of funnel and that kind of thing. And I've seen this, so it's not a completely ignorant question, which is, what would you say to one of the people in the audience that would say, well, that just means I need to market more, right? That I need to sell more, because it's not, I already know the solution's good, right? It's good enough. That just means that I actually just need to change my copy, just sell more, get them to believe me more, just convince them. What would you say to that, where the founder is so hard set on their solution or on their features that they're building that they can't get out of their own head and get out of their own way?
Yeah, I'd say depending on the business that they're in, you're not just looking at top of funnel, I think that tells you and I may be,
good point.
I think Adam, you brought this up. This is the vanity metric. I had lots of people coming in the door. I feel good about myself, but I think if you don't have them converting, so going from if it's a digital product and you're offering a trial, are they converting into a paid product at the end of that trial? So that's telling you, hey, that's my first metric where I'm saying, hey, I have something here. Or at the end of that initial conversation, they're converting. And then the other thing is, depending on the business, are they churning? Because that's going to tell you, hey, I had a product that was great. It had great start. It had a great start, but something was wrong with the way in which my customers were interacting with it, because they're deciding, hey, this is not worth my dollar. Or and in place of that, maybe you may not be looking at churn. You may be looking at, hey, does this person, I expect these folks to come back and buy 7 days later because the product is that good. That's going to be another measure that I'm saying, hey, that's gonna tell me what I need to know about, do I have staying power? Does my product or my solution have the ability to turn this person around and have them back at my door 7 days later, ready to make a new purchase? So I'll back out there, but that's my initial thought.
Yeah. So the same way I could say, positive and question certain things of business model canvas, I can do the same thing. I can be pretty objective with lean startup in general. Well, obviously, it's been a big part of my life, but I think the superpower is not necessarily the MVP or, customer discovery, or the ability to zoom into a specific piece of the funnel and test that assumption, like independently, where people think you can only do, the selling or the conversion piece at the end, but it's like, no, you can actually hold constant. Like I remember, talking to a room of corporate innovators, like, well, nobody's subscription is up. This is a 12-month test. It's like, well, no, you could take 10 people, send them an email right now, come up with, they have no idea you're running an experiment or that you're in this crazy workshop with, the data corn guy. Tell me you're running a promotion that, anyone who renews now gets a 10% discount, or that like something happened with your servers, or, it's like, there are ways of not doing things sequentially and doing things out of order and holding, whether you call that a concierge MVP or not. I think there's ways of isolating variables with lean startup where it's like, okay, you think this is kind of what I was talking about before, where it's like all your assumptions. If you know the entire journey, you actually can go all the way to the end and test that thing first. That's your riskiest assumption. Or you can zoom in on, if you had $1,000, you could reach 100,000 people. Is that true? If that's the fundamental thing that you believe, that just more people, then let's go take $100 and see if you can reach 10,000 people or whatever. I think I did the math there right. And then let them argue with that. It's like, well, no, it's increased, so it's asymptotic, and all of it's going to come at the end. It's like, all right, well then when does the curve start? Like, it starts at the end? Well, no, it doesn't work that way, because at some point someone has to convert, or someone has to renew, or someone has to not churn. So where in your customer journey map are you making that assumption? And I do think what's always sort of drawn me to lean startup is that ability when Dunker, and I agree, some people don't always believe it or run the experiment, but there's ways of sort of suspending belief. That's like, the mechanical Turks. There, you can hold the universe constant for a second and test that specific thing, and it gets out of that debate sometimes if done right.
All right, gents. We're gonna have to wrap it up for time, and so I will leave you all as a primer for this week with one final question. For you, what do you see as an assumption that you need to test before your workshop this week? Because you're coming in with assumptions. What is something that you need to test before you get it? Is it your content? Is it the audience? Is it the location?
Well, as I will tell you, as the person who is offered up to help to guide this conversation, to help pull the information from from John and Jamar, I've started to test my assumption. I have an entire list of notes. I built this list of notes because I wanted to have these notes available. So, for instance, going in and saying this, oh snap, the one metric, thank you, I don't know what happened. The one metric that matters.
Just trying to see your notes.
Oh, sorry. The one metric that matters is one of those things that I'm like, I had not thought about that. And so I needed to test the assumption that I had a decent idea, which I did, but now I have more data that allows me to have this fourth wall conversation. Because I'm telling you guys, I'm literally going, oh, I know exactly when to jump out into the audience, like, fourth wall, are you all paying attention to this? Raise your hand. How many of you have a one metric that matters? All right. Then I can go to the two of you and do that. So that's my assumption. I tested before the workshop, and I appreciate you all.
I like it. Jamar?
Yeah, the one thing I want to drill in on, and the thing that I'm going to be, as I'm traveling in, I'm going to be thinking deeply about is, my assumption is that you might not be able to draw a straight line between how corporate deals with answering some of these business questions, how we answer some of these business questions in corporate spaces, and how there's a direct line between how those same questions are asked for those that are founders and starting their own organizations. I want to test my assumption to better understand, is that line more direct? And are a lot of the questions that we're asking that I'm dealing with on a regular basis, are those the same types of questions being asked, and thought about by those that are founding and starting their own organizations,
Nice.
as they look to have conversations around injecting more capital into their business to expand, or to grow their organization. So that's the assumption I'm looking to test.
I like it. What's their journey?
Yeah.
I love it.
Perfect. Yeah.
Adam?
I don't know if we can test it before the work. So a piece of data that I want to know, and I think we can do this in the first 30 seconds, is polling the room. I always wish you could know. So who's in the room? Is it startups, corporates,
Right.
small businesses, and who are we talking to, and how do we make the best use of a real-time work? So that's just a piece of data.
Yeah, I agree. That's a hard part of meeting people where they are. Mm-hmm.
I do think, I do think if we run that, I think there'll probably be about 100 people in the room. And if we know that like a majority of them are startups or small, that we can run this experiment where we bring someone that represents the largest, and most of these things do crossover. So even the people that aren't a startup, a lot of the terms will carry over. To truly answer your question, I think the assumption that we can clarify their goals, I think the metrics becomes easy to be like, all right, this is what you're measuring. This is how you're telling a story to investors or stakeholders or customers or yourself or your spouse or whoever, that you're on the right track or that your strategy might be working. I still think the assumption around the goal, the intermediate goal, because I don't think it's a binary relationship between the experiment. I think it's 3-tiered. I think it's 10-tiered. So it's easy to be like A maps to B, but the assumption that B is the right thing or the defining thing or
Right.
that to me, I think is, I don't know how to test that, but I think that's definitely the riskiest assumption.
Awesome. All right. Excellent. Well, good luck, gentlemen. This has been a great exercise, and I wish you luck. Any final
Thank you.
thoughts?
I'm excited, John. I want to thank you for providing the space to help us workshop this and doing the work. I have a feeling that out of this, there's going to be a lot of energy that's going to come out of this room. And so, gents, be prepared for that's one of my assumptions. The other assumption I'm testing going out of this is that that we're going to do so well that we're going to get tapped on the shoulder to come and speak and come and work with people.
Absolutely.
All right. Wish you all the best.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Don't go
Have a
anywhere
good
yet,
night.
Jamar.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you guys. Yep.
Take care.
All right.